That's the choice they gave Margaret Hale. Widow, landowner, survivor. 3 days after burying her husband, the law stripped away her rights, and the town picked her next husband from a lineup of vultures. Jonas Reed, gunslinger, drifter, a man with more scars than words. She didn't choose him. She didn't want him. But the frontier doesn't care what women want. This is their story. Blood, bullets, and something neither expected. Stay until the end. Hit like. Comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The courthouse smelled like sweat and old wood. Margaret Hale stood in the center of the room, black dress clinging to her frame, dust settling on her shoulders from the ride into town. Her hands were folded in front of her, knuckles white. She wasn't praying. She'd stopped that weeks ago. Judge Carver sat behind a crooked desk that had seen better decades, his face sagging with age and indifference. Around him the room buzzed with men, landowners, drifters, opportunists, all of them watching her like she was livestock at auction. She hated every single one of them. "Mrs. Hale," the judge said, shuffling papers without looking up. "You understand the situation." "I understand you're about to rob me," Margaret said. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone laughed. The judge finally raised his eyes, cold and unmoved. "The law is clear. A woman cannot hold property without a male head of household. Your husband is dead. You have no sons, no brothers, no father. I have myself. That's not enough." Margaret's jaw tightened. She wanted to scream, to flip that desk, to walk out and let them all rot. But she'd learned something bitter in the last 3 weeks. Anger didn't change the law. It just made you look weak. "So you're forcing me to marry?" "I'm enforcing the statute," Carver said. "You have 7 days to secure a husband or the land reverts to the county. We'll auction it to cover your debts." "I don't have debts." "You will." He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Legal fees, processing costs, storage of assets. By the time we're done, you'll owe more than the land's worth." There it was, the trap. She'd walked in here hoping for fairness. She should have known better. "And if I refuse?" "Then you leave town with nothing." Carver leaned back in his chair. "Or you stay and take your pick." He gestured to the men scattered around the room. Margaret's stomach turned. There was Samuel Dorr, the banker, 50 years old, with breath like rotting meat. He'd been sniffing around her land since the day her husband died. Then Richard Kane, a neighboring rancher who'd tried to buy her out twice and made it clear the third offer wouldn't be polite. A handful of drifters she didn't recognize. And in the back corner, leaning against the wall like a shadow, Jonas Reed. She'd seen him before. Everyone had. He didn't talk much, didn't drink in the saloon, didn't work a steady job, just drifted through town every few months, took work no one else wanted, and left before anyone got too curious. He had a scar running from his temple to his jaw, another across his knuckles. His eyes were dark, unreadable. And when he looked at her, it wasn't with hunger or pity. It was with nothing. "You've got until next Wednesday," Carver said. "Pick one, or we'll pick for you." Margaret turned and walked out. The sun hit her like the slap. She stood on the courthouse steps, breathing hard, trying to keep the rage from spilling over. Around her, the town moved like nothing had happened. Wagons rolled past. A dog barked. Somewhere, a child laughed. Her world was ending and no one cared. "Mrs. Hale." She turned. Jonas Reed stood a few feet away, hat low, hands loose at his sides. Up close, the scar on his face looked worse, jagged, deliberate. Someone had meant to kill him and failed. "I'm not interested," she said. "Didn't ask if you were." "Then why are you talking to me?" He didn't answer right away, just looked at her, steady and cold. "You're going to lose that land," he said finally. "I know. Door's already planning to take it. Kane'll burn you out if you don't sell. The judge gets a cut either way." Margaret's hands curled into fists. "And you're different?" "No." Jonas shifted his weight. "But I don't want your land, don't want your money, don't want you." "Then what do you want?" "A roof, food, work." She laughed bitterly. "So you want to use me?" "Everyone's using you," Jonas said. "At least I'm honest about it." Margaret stared at him, searching for the lie, the angle. Men like him always had one. But his face gave nothing away. "Why would you help me?" "I'm not." He tilted his head slightly. "I'm offering a trade. You need a name on paper,
I need a place to stay. We make it legal, keep it cold. You run your land. I stay out of your way. When it's safe, we end it. And if I say no, then you marry Dorr or Cain or whoever Carver picks for you. Jonas's voice didn't change. And they'll take everything.
Margaret wanted to tell him to go to hell, wanted to spit in his face and walk away. But the truth sat heavy in her chest, and it tasted like ash. He was right. No force, she said quietly. No force. You stay in the barn, not the house. Fine. And when this is over, you leave. Jonas nodded once. When it's over. She should have felt something. Relief, maybe, or dread. But all she felt was tired. We do this tomorrow, she said, before I change my mind. Jonas touched the brim of his hat and walked away. Margaret stood alone on the courthouse steps, watching him disappear into the crowd. She'd just agreed to marry a man she didn't trust, and somehow it was the smartest thing she'd done all week. The cabin sat 3 miles outside town, tucked against a hillside with a clear view of the valley. It wasn't much, 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, a barn that leaned slightly to the left. But it was hers. Or it had been. Margaret rode up the path as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the prairie. The air smelled like sage and dust. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. She dismounted and stood for a moment, just looking. Her husband had built this place. Every board, every nail. He'd died defending it from a pack of raiders who'd thought a woman alone was easy prey. They'd been wrong, but it had cost him everything. And now the law wanted to take it away because she didn't have a man's name attached to hers. Margaret's hands shook. She pressed them flat against her thighs, forcing the anger down. Tomorrow, she'd fix it. Tomorrow, she'd survive. The wedding took 11 minutes. Judge Carver officiated in the same courthouse, with the same disinterested expression. Margaret wore the same black dress. Jonas wore a clean shirt and the same unreadable face. There were no guests, no flowers, no vows beyond the legal script. Do you take this man? Yes. Do you take this woman? Yes. Carver scribbled something on a certificate and slid it across the desk. Sign here. Margaret signed. Jonas signed. The ink was still wet when Carver stamped it and shoved it into a folder. Congratulations, he said flatly. You're married. Margaret walked out without a word. Jonas followed. They rode back to the cabin in silence, her on her mare, him on a scarred gelding that looked meaner than he did. The sun climbed higher. The wind picked up. Neither of them spoke. When they reached the property, Jonas dismounted and looked around. The barn, the fence line, the field stretching out toward the horizon. You run cattle? He asked. Used to. Sold most of them after my husband died. Jonas nodded. You'll need more. I know. I'll fix the fence tomorrow. Margaret studied him. He wasn't asking permission. Wasn't trying to charm her. Just stating facts. The barn's through there, she said, pointing. There's a cot. Blankets in the chest. I'll manage. I'm sure you will. She turned toward the house, then paused. Jonas? He looked back. This doesn't mean I trust you. Good, he said. Don't. Margaret went inside and shut the door. The first 3 days were quiet. Jonas fixed the fence, rebuilt part of the barn roof, didn't talk unless she asked him something directly. At meals, he ate in silence, then disappeared back outside. Margaret tried to hate him for it, tried to feel angry, violated, trapped, but the truth was stranger than that. He didn't touch her, didn't watch her, didn't make demands. He was just there. It unnerved her more than anything else. On the 4th day, Samuel Dorr showed up. Margaret was hauling water from the well when she saw the wagon rolling up the path, dust trailing behind it. Her stomach dropped. Dorr climbed down, smiling that oily smile, tipping his hat like they were old friends. Mrs. Hale, he said. Or should I say, Mrs. Reed. What do you want, Samuel? Just checking in. He glanced toward the barn. Heard you got yourself hitched. Quick work. The law didn't give me much choice. Still, Dorr's smile widened. Interesting pick. A drifter. No land, no money. Makes a man wonder. Margaret set the bucket down. Wonder all you want. The land's mine. Legally.
For now. Dor stepped closer. But see, the thing about drifters, Margaret, they drift. And when he's gone, you'll be right back where you started. Then I guess you'll have to wait and see. Dor's smile faded. I'm trying to help you. No, you're trying to steal from me. There's a difference. His eyes went cold. You're making a mistake. Wouldn't be my first. Dor stared at her for a long moment, then climbed back into his wagon. I'll be around, he said. When this falls apart. He rode off, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Margaret stood alone in the yard, heart pounding, hands clenched. She didn't hear Jonas until he spoke. He'll be back. She spun. Jonas stood near the barn, hammer in hand, watching the road. I know, Margaret said. You want me to handle it? No. She picked up the bucket. I want you to stay out of it. Jonas didn't argue, just turned and went back to work. But that night, Margaret noticed he slept closer to the house, Shamset. The wolves came on the 6th night. Margaret woke to the sound of the horses screaming. She bolted upright, heart hammering, and grabbed the rifle by her bed. Outside, the night was pitch black, no moon, just stars scattered across the sky like broken glass. The horses were losing their minds. She ran to the window. In the dim light, she could see shapes moving near the barn, low, fast, circling. Wolves. Margaret threw on her coat and boots, loaded the rifle, and ran outside. The cold hit her like a fist. She could hear them now, snarling, snapping, the horses kicking at the stall doors. One of the wolves lunged at the barn entrance, teeth flashing. Margaret raised the rifle and fired. The shot cracked through the night. The wolf yelped and bolted, blood trailing behind it. The others scattered. Margaret kept the rifle up, breathing hard, scanning the darkness. For a moment, everything was still. Then Jonas was there. He came out of the shadows like he'd been part of them, shotgun in hand, moving fast and silent. He didn't say a word, just positioned himself between her and the tree line, eyes locked on the darkness. How many? Margaret asked. 5, maybe 6. They'll come back. Yeah. They stood there in the freezing dark, waiting. Margaret's hands were numb. Her breath came out in clouds. But she didn't lower the rifle. Minutes passed, then an hour. The wolves didn't return. Finally, Jonas lowered the shotgun. They're gone. Margaret exhaled, shoulders sagging. Thank you. Jonas glanced at her, then back at the tree line. You didn't need me. You handled it. I needed the backup. He didn't respond, just walked toward the barn to check the horses. Margaret stood alone in the yard, still holding the rifle, still shaking. Not from fear. From something else. Ban! The next morning, Jonas reinforced the barn, built a stronger latch, set traps along the perimeter. Margaret watched him work from the porch, coffee in hand. You didn't have to stay, she said. You paid for it. That's not what I mean. Jonas paused, hammer in hand, and looked at her. Then what do you mean? Margaret hesitated. She didn't know how to say it without sounding weak. You could have left me to deal with it alone. Could have. But you didn't. Jonas went back to hammering. No. Margaret took a sip of coffee, watching him. He didn't explain himself, didn't make excuses, just worked. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, she felt something she hadn't expected. Not trust, not yet, but the possibility of it. Richard Kane showed up 2 days later. He came with 3 men, ranch hands, rough-looking, armed. Margaret saw them riding up and felt her stomach twist. Jonas was out checking the fence line. She was alone. Kane dismounted slowly, making a show of it. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with a face like sun-dried leather. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Mrs. Reed, he said, heard congratulations are in order. Mr. Kane. Margaret stayed on the porch, rifle leaning against the wall within reach. What brings you out here? Just being neighborly. He gestured to the land. Wanted to see how you and your new husband are settling in. We're fine. That's good. Real good. Kane stepped closer. You know, I made your late husband a fair offer on this place. More than fair. He turned you down. He did, and now he's dead. Kane's smile faded. Shame that. Good man. Bad luck. Margaret's hand drifted toward the rifle. Get to the point. The point is, you're in over your head. A woman and a drifter trying to hold on to land you can't work, can't protect. It's only a matter of time before something happens. Is that a threat? It's a fact. Kane glanced toward the barn. Where's your husband, anyway? Around? Convenient. Kane's men shifted, hands resting on their gun belts. Here's what I'm thinking. I'll buy this place from you, cash, today. You and your drifter can ride off, start fresh somewhere else. No trouble. No mess. I'm not selling. Kane's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. That seems to be the popular opinion. This isn't a game, Margaret. He stepped onto the porch. You think that scarred-up gunslinger's gonna protect you? Men like him don't stick around. They take what they can and disappear. Then I guess I'll deal with that when it happens. Kane stared at her, anger flickering in his eyes. You've got 1 week to reconsider. Or what? He didn't answer, just turned and walked back to his horse. Margaret watched them ride off, heart pounding, hands shaking. She didn't hear Jonas until he spoke. How long were they here? She turned. Jonas stood at the corner of the house, shotgun slung over his shoulder, eyes tracking the riders as they disappeared over the hill. Long enough, Margaret said. He threaten you? Not directly. Jonas looked at her. But he will. Yeah. He set the shotgun down and walked toward the barn. I'll keep watch tonight. Jonas? He stopped. Margaret hesitated, then said, Why are you doing this? Doing what? Staying, helping. You don't owe me anything. Jonas looked at her for a long moment. I made a deal, he said finally. I keep my deals. He walked into the barn and shut the door. Margaret stood alone on the porch, staring at the horizon. For the first time, she wondered if she'd misjudged him. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. Her mind kept circling back to Kane's words. Men like him don't stick around. Was that true? She didn't know Jonas, didn't know where he came from, what he'd done, why he drifted. She'd married him out of desperation, not choice. But he'd stayed when the wolves came. He'd reinforced the barn. He'd stood between her and Kane's men without being asked. Maybe that didn't mean anything, or maybe it meant everything. She rolled over, frustrated, and closed her eyes. Sleep didn't come. The knock on the door came just before dawn. Margaret sat up, heart racing. She grabbed the rifle and moved to the window, peering out. A man stood on the porch. Tall, lean, dressed in dark clothes, a hat pulled low. Not Kane, not door. Someone new. Margaret opened the door slowly, rifle raised. Who are you? The man smiled. It was the kind of smile that made her skin crawl. Name's Eli Frost, he said. I'm looking for Jonas Reed. Margaret's blood went cold. Why? Old business. Frost's eyes flicked to the rifle. Is he here? No. Liar. Before Margaret could react, Jonas was there. He came out of the barn fast, shotgun leveled, eyes locked on Frost. Eli. Frost turned, smile widening. Jonas, been a long time. Not long enough. That's cold. Frost spread his hands. I'm just here to talk. Then talk. Frost glanced at Margaret, then back at Jonas. Maybe we should do this private. Say it here or don't say it at all. Frost's smile faded. You know why I'm here? Yeah. They want you back. Too bad. They're not asking. Jonas's grip on the shotgun tightened. Tell them I'm done. You don't get to be done, Jonas. Not after what you did. Margaret's mind raced. What you did. What the hell did that mean? Frost took a step closer. You've got 3 days. After that, they come looking, and they won't care who's in the way. Let them come. Frost studied him, then shook his head. You always were stubborn. He tipped his hat to Margaret. Ma'am, pleasure. He walked to his horse, mounted, and rode off into the pale dawn light. Margaret lowered the rifle, hands shaking. Who was that? Jonas didn't answer. Jonas. He turned and looked at her. For the first time, she saw something in his eyes. Fear. People from my past, he said quietly. What kind of people? The kind that don't forgive. Margaret's chest tightened. What did you do? Jonas looked away. Something I can't take back. Are they going to come here? Yeah. When? Soon. Margaret's mind spun. This was exactly what Cain had said. Men like him don't stick around. And now Jonas's past was about to crash into her life, her land, everything she'd fought to keep. She should have been furious, should have told him to leave, but instead she asked, "What do we do?" Jonas looked at her, surprised. "We? You're my husband. Legally." Margaret's voice was steady. "If they're coming for you, they're coming for me too. You don't have to church. I know." She met his eyes. "But I'm not running. This is my land, and if we're going to survive this, we do it together." For a long moment, Jonas just stared at her. Then he nodded. "All right," he said, "together." Margaret felt something shift between them. Not trust. Not yet. But the beginning of it. And for the first time since this nightmare started, she wasn't alone. Moms. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Jonas reinforced the doors, boarded up windows, set traps along the property line. Margaret loaded every gun they had, stockpiled ammunition, mapped out escape routes. They didn't talk much, just worked. But at night, when the fire burned low and the darkness pressed close, Jonas told her pieces of his story. He'd been part of a crew, outlaws. They'd robbed trains, banks, payrolls. He'd been good at it, too good. Then one job went wrong. People died. Innocent people. Jonas had walked away, left the crew, the life, everything. But they didn't forgive deserters. And now they were coming to collect. Margaret listened without judgment, didn't tell him he was a monster, didn't tell him he was forgiven, just listened. "I don't expect you to fight for me," Jonas said quietly. "I'm not fighting for you," Margaret said. "I'm fighting for this land, for my life. You just happen to be part of it now." Jonas looked at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "You're stronger than you look." Margaret smiled bitterly. "I've had to be." They came on the third night. 4 riders, armed, moving fast. Margaret saw them first, silhouetted against the moonlight. She rang the bell, 2 sharp clangs, and grabbed her rifle. Jonas came out of the barn, shotgun ready. The riders stopped at the edge of the property, just beyond rifle range. One of them called out, "Jonas Reed, we know you're in there." Jonas stepped forward. "I'm here." "Come out. We just want to talk." "You want to talk? You can do it from there." Silence. Then laughter. "All right, Jonas. Have it your way." The first shot shattered the night. Margaret ducked behind the porch railing as bullets tore through the wood. Jonas fired back, the shotgun booming, and one of the riders went down screaming. The others scattered, taking cover behind rocks and trees. Margaret aimed carefully and fired. Missed. Fired again. This time she hit one of the horses. It reared and threw its rider. Jonas reloaded and fired again, steady and precise. "Get inside!" he shouted. "No!" "Margaret, I said no!" Another volley of gunfire. Margaret felt something burn across her arm. Not a direct hit, just a graze, but it stung like hell. She gritted her teeth and kept firing. The fight lasted 10 minutes, maybe less. Time blurred into noise and smoke and adrenaline. When it ended, 2 men were dead. One was wounded, crawling toward his horse. The 4th had run. Jonas walked out into the open, shotgun raised, and put a bullet in the wounded man's leg. The man screamed. "Where's the rest of them?" Jonas demanded. "Go to hell!" Jonas stepped closer. "How many are coming?" "Enough to kill you both." Margaret walked up beside Jonas, rifle still raised, blood dripping from her arm. "Let him go," she said. Jonas looked at her. "What?" "Let him go. Let him tell them what happened here." Jonas stared at her for a long moment, then stepped back. The man dragged himself onto his horse and rode off, bleeding and broken. Margaret lowered the rifle, breathing hard. Jonas looked at her. "You're hurt." "I'm fine." "You're bleeding." "I said I'm fine." But her hands were shaking, and her vision blurred at the edges. Jonas caught her before she fell. Bam! She woke up in her bed, arm bandaged, fire crackling in the hearth. Jonas sat in a chair by the door, shotgun across his lap, watching the window. "How long was I out?" Margaret asked. "Couple hours." She sat up slowly, wincing. "Did they come back?" "Not yet." Margaret looked at him. His face was hard, unreadable, but there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Guilt. "This is my fault," he said quietly. "No, it's theirs. I brought this to your door."
"And I chose to fight."
Margaret's voice was steady. "I'm not a victim, Jonas. I made a choice." He looked at her, and for the first time she saw the weight he carried. "I don't deserve that," he said. "Maybe not." Margaret leaned back against the pillow. "But you're stuck with it." Jonas almost smiled. Almost. "You should rest. So should you." "Can't." "Why not?" "Because if I close my eyes, they'll come back."
Margaret studied him. "Then don't close them, but sit closer. I don't want to die alone if they do." Jonas hesitated, then moved his chair closer to the bed. They sat in silence, listening to the wind, watching the fire burn low. And somewhere in the darkness, Margaret realized something. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not of Jonas. Not of the men hunting him. Not of the law or the land or the future. She was angry. And anger, she'd learned, was so much stronger than fear. Morning came too fast. Margaret woke to pale light streaming through the cracks in the shutters, her arm throbbing beneath the bandage. Jonas was still in the chair by the door, awake, eyes fixed on the horizon. He hadn't moved all night. "You didn't sleep at all," she said. "Couldn't." Margaret pushed herself up, wincing. The room spun for a second, then settled. "We can't keep doing this. One of us has to rest." "I'll rest when they're gone." "And when will that be?" Jonas didn't answer. He just stood and walked to the window, scanning the tree line like a man expecting ghosts. Margaret threw off the blanket and got to her feet, ignoring the protest from her body. She needed to move, needed to think. Lying in bed while danger circled them felt like surrender. "I'm making coffee," she said. "You should stay down." "I should do a lot of things." She walked past him toward the kitchen. "But I'm making coffee." Jonas watched her go, something shifting in his expression. Not quite approval, not quite concern, something in between. The fire had died to embers. Margaret rebuilt it slowly, her injured arm making everything harder. She filled the kettle, set it to boil, and leaned against the counter, breathing through the pain. She'd been shot at, she'd shot back, she'd watched men die. And the strangest part was how normal it felt. Not easy, not comfortable, but necessary. Her husband had taught her to shoot years ago, back when raiders were just rumors, and the frontier felt almost tame. He'd insisted she learn, said a woman alone out here needed to know how to defend herself. He'd been right. Margaret poured the coffee when it was ready and brought a cup to Jonas. He took it without a word, hands wrapped around the heat. "They'll come back," she said quietly. "Yeah." "How many more?" "Don't know. The crew used to be 12, maybe 15. Jonas sipped the coffee, eyes still on the window. "But some of them are dead, some moved on. Hard to say." "And the ones who are left?" "They're loyal, to each other, to the code." He paused. "And they hate traitors." Margaret absorbed that. "So we're looking at what? 5 more? 10? Could be. And you think they'll all come here?" Jonas nodded slowly. "Eventually." Margaret sat down at the table, cradling her own cup. Her mind worked through the logistics, food, ammunition, water. How long could they hold out if this turned into a siege? Not long. "We need help," she said. Jonas looked at her. "Who?" "The town, the sheriff." "The sheriff won't do anything. Half the town wants you gone anyway." "Then we make them want us to stay." Jonas frowned. "How?" Margaret thought for a moment. "We give them a reason. Show them we're not the problem. Show them your old crew is." "You want to turn this into their fight?" "I want to make it clear that if we fall, they're next." Margaret met his eyes. "Because it's true, isn't it? Your crew doesn't just want you. They want chaos. They want to burn things down." Jonas didn't deny it. "Then we use that," Margaret said. "We go into town. We tell them what's coming, and we make them understand that helping us helps them." Jonas set his cup down. "They won't believe you." "They might believe you. I'm a stranger, a drifter. They don't trust me." "Then we make them." Margaret's voice hardened. "Or we die out here alone. Your choice." Jonas stared at her, and something like respect flickered across his face. "You're not what I expected," he said. "Good. I'd
hate to be predictable. He almost smiled. All right, we go to town, but we do it smart. We don't give them a chance to turn on us. Agreed. They rode out an hour later, Margaret on her mare, Jonas on his gelding. The morning was cold and clear, the kind of day that felt deceptive in its beauty. Margaret kept her rifle across her lap, eyes scanning the hills.
Jonas rode slightly ahead, shotgun slung across his back, his body loose but alert. He moved like a man who'd spent his life expecting ambush. They didn't talk. The silence between them had shifted over the past few days, less hostile, more functional. They were learning each other's rhythms, the way soldiers did in war. Margaret wasn't sure what that made them. Partners, maybe. Or just two people too stubborn to die. The town appeared on the horizon an hour later, a cluster of buildings huddled against the prairie like they were bracing for a storm. Smoke rose from chimneys. A few people moved along the main street. Margaret felt her stomach tighten. This could go very wrong. They hitched the horses outside the sheriff's office and walked in together. Sheriff Tom Hackett sat behind his desk, boots propped up, reading a newspaper that was 3 weeks old. He glanced up when they entered, and his expression soured. "Mrs. Reed," he said flatly. "Mr. Reed." "Sheriff." Margaret stepped forward. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About the men who attacked my property last night." Hackett's boots hit the floor. "What men?" "4 riders, armed. They came looking for Jonas." Hackett's eyes flicked to Jonas, hard and suspicious. "That's so," Jonas nodded. "And what'd you do to make them come looking?" "Old business," Jonas said. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting." Hackett stood slowly, hand resting on his gun belt. "Let me tell you what I think. I think you brought trouble to this town. I think you're using Mrs. Hale here as a shield. And I think the best thing you could do is ride out before more people get hurt." Margaret stepped between them. "He's not going anywhere." "Margaret, he's my husband, legally. And if you're telling him to leave, you're telling me to give up my land." Hackett's jaw tightened. "This isn't about your land." "Yes, it is, because if Jonas leaves, those men will still come. They'll burn my place to the ground looking for him. And when they're done with me, they'll come here." "That's a hell of an assumption." "It's not an assumption. It's a fact." Margaret's voice was steady, cold. "These men are outlaws. They don't care about boundaries. They don't care about innocent people. And if you let them take Jonas without a fight, you're showing them this town is soft." Hackett stared at her. "You don't know that." "I know enough." Margaret leaned forward. "We killed 2 of them last night, sent a 3rd one running. That means they know we're not easy targets, but they'll come back. And when they do, we can either stand together or fall separately." Hackett looked at Jonas. "You got anything to add?" "She's right," Jonas said simply. "That it?" "That's it." Hackett rubbed his face, frustration etched into every line. "Even if I wanted to help, I've got no men, no resources. This town barely has a militia." "Then deputize people," Margaret said. "Offer protection to anyone willing to stand with us." "And who's going to volunteer for that?" "People who don't want their homes burned down." Hackett sighed. "You're asking me to start a war." "No," Margaret said. "I'm asking you to finish one." Hackett looked between them, then shook his head. "I'll think about it." "Think fast," Jonas said, "because they're coming." They walked out into the sunlight, and Margaret felt the weight of failure pressing down on her shoulders. "That went well," she muttered. "Better than I expected." "He's not going to help us." "Maybe not." Jonas glanced down the street. "But someone might." Margaret followed his gaze. A small group of men stood outside the saloon, watching them. She recognized a few faces. Ranch hands, workers, drifters, men who lived on the edges of society, just like Jonas. "You think they'd fight?" she asked. "For money?" "Yeah." "I don't have money." "Then we offer something else." "Like what?" Jonas looked at her. "Land, work, a future." Margaret blinked. "You want me to promise them jobs? You need hands anyway. Your place is falling apart. Offer them work now, protection later. Make it a trade." Margaret considered it. It was risky. She didn't know these men, didn't trust them, but she didn't have a choice. "All right," she said, "let's talk to them." They crossed the street, boots kicking up dust. The men watched them approach, expressions ranging from curious to hostile. One of them stepped forward, a lean man with a scar across his cheek and eyes that had seen too much. His name was Cole. Margaret had seen him around town, always alone, always broke. "Mrs. Reed," Cole said, "heard you had some excitement last night." "Word travels fast." "Small town." Cole's eyes flicked to Jonas. "You the one they're after?" "Yeah." "What'd you do?" "Left the wrong people." Cole nodded slowly. "And now they're coming for you." "That's right." "So why should we care?" Margaret spoke before Jonas could. "Because when they're done with us, they'll come for you. This town. Everyone in it." Cole laughed, but it was bitter. "Lady, nobody in this town gives a damn about us. We're the ones they kick out when times get tough. Why would we fight for them?" "You wouldn't," Margaret said. "You'd fight for yourselves. For a chance at something better." "And what's that? Work? Fair pay. A place to stay." Margaret gestured toward her land. "I need hands. My ranch needs rebuilding. I can't pay much, but I can offer food, shelter, and a shot at a future. All I'm asking is that you help us survive the next few weeks." Cole studied her, skeptical. "And if we say no?" "Then you stay here, broken hungry, waiting for the next town to kick you out." Silence. One of the other men spoke up. "How many are coming?" "Don't know," Jonas said. "Could be 5, could be 10. "And you think we can win?" "I think we can make them regret trying." Cole crossed his arms. "You got a plan?" "Yeah," Jonas said. "Don't die." A few of the men laughed. Cole didn't. "That's not a plan." "It's better than nothing." Cole looked at Margaret. "You serious about the work?" "Dead serious." "And you'll feed us?" "Every day." Cole exchanged glances with the other men, then nodded. "All right, we'll ride out with you. But if this goes sideways, we're gone." "Fair enough," Margaret said. They rode back to the ranch with 5 new men. Cole, a quiet kid named Sam, a grizzled older man called Dutch, and 2 brothers who didn't talk much but looked like they could handle themselves. Margaret didn't trust any of them, but she needed them. The first thing Jonas did was put them to work. He split them into pairs, Cole and Sam on perimeter watch, Dutch and the brothers reinforcing the barn. Jonas himself worked on building barricades around the house. Margaret coordinated supplies, food, water, ammunition. She inventoried everything they had, rationed what they'd need, and made lists of what they didn't have. It felt like preparing for a siege, because that's exactly what it was. By nightfall, the ranch looked different, fortified, ready. The men gathered around the fire outside, eating stew Margaret had made from what little she had. They didn't talk much, just ate and watched the darkness. Jonas stood apart, scanning the horizon. Margaret walked over to him, holding 2 tin cups of coffee. "You need to eat," she said, handing him one. "Later." "Jonas." He took the cup but didn't drink. "They're out there." "I know. They're watching, waiting." "Then let them wait." Margaret stood beside him, staring into the dark. "We're ready." Jonas glanced at her. "You really believe that?" "I have to." He didn't argue. Just sipped the coffee, eyes never leaving the tree line. Margaret felt the weight of everything pressing down, the land, the men, the danger. But underneath it all was something else. Determination. She'd fought too hard to lose now. The attack came 3 days later. It started just after dawn, when the light was thin and the world was still waking up. Margaret heard the first gunshot and knew immediately this wasn't a probe. This was the real thing. "Positions!" Jonas shouted. The men scrambled. Cole and Sam took the barn. Dutch and the brothers covered the side windows. Jonas grabbed his rifle and moved to the front. Margaret loaded her shotgun and crouched behind the porch railing. The riders came fast, 8 of them this time, spread out, firing as they charged. Bullets tore through the air. Wood splintered, glass shattered. Margaret fired into the mass of riders, saw one go down, reloaded, fired again. Jonas was a machine, steady, precise, every shot landing. He dropped 2 men in quick succession, then shifted positions and kept firing. Cole's rifle cracked from the barn. Another rider fell. The assault lasted minutes but felt like hours. When it ended, 4 men were dead. 3 had retreated. 1 was wounded, crawling toward the tree line. Jonas walked out into the open and put a bullet in the dirt beside the man's head. The man froze. "Who sent you?" Jonas demanded. "Go to hell." Jonas fired again, closer this time. "Last chance." The man spat blood. Caleb sent us." Margaret's blood went cold. She'd heard that name before. Jonas had mentioned it once, late at night, when he thought she was asleep.
Caleb Rourke, the leader of the crew Jonas had left behind. "Where is he?" Jonas asked. "Coming." The man laughed, ugly and wet. "And when he gets here, you're dead, both of you." Jonas shot him. Margaret flinched but didn't look away. Jonas turned and walked back toward the house, face carved from stone. The men came out slowly, checking bodies, gathering weapons. Cole approached Margaret. "That's the second wave. How many more you think there are?"
"I don't know. We can't keep this up forever." "I know." Cole looked at Jonas. "He's the target. Maybe if he left." "He's not leaving," Margaret said sharply. "I'm just saying." "I know what you're saying, and the answer is no." Cole raised his hands. "Your call." Margaret watched Jonas disappear into the barn, shoulders tight, movements sharp. She followed. He was reloading the rifle, hands moving fast, eyes distant. "Jonas!" He didn't look up. "Jonas, we need to talk." "Not now." "Yes, now." Margaret stepped in front of him. "Who is Caleb Rourke?" Jonas's hands stilled. "You don't want to know." "I think I do." He set the rifle down and finally looked at her. "He was my partner, my brother, in every way that mattered. And you left him." "I left all of them." "Why?" Jonas's jaw tightened. "Because I was tired of killing people who didn't deserve it." Margaret absorbed that. "What happened?" Jonas turned away. "We hit a payroll train. Easy job. No guards, just clerks and passengers. We were supposed to take the money and go." He paused. "But Caleb wanted to send a message, make it memorable, so he started shooting." Jonas's voice went flat. "Killed a woman. Killed her kid. Just because he could." Margaret felt sick. "I tried to stop him," Jonas continued. "We fought. I put a gun to his head and told him if he didn't walk away, I'd kill him." "And?" He laughed, said I didn't have the guts. Jonas's hands curled into fists. "So I left. Took my horse and rode out. Never looked back." "And now he's coming for you." "Yeah." Margaret stepped closer. "Then we kill him first." Jonas looked at her, something raw in his eyes. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." Margaret's voice was steel. "He's coming here to destroy us, to take everything, and I'm not going to let that happen. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment I married you." Jonas stared at her, and for the first time she saw the walls crack. "You should hate me," he said quietly. "Maybe." Margaret held his gaze. "But I don't." Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. The space that had existed between them, the cold distance they'd maintained, was shrinking. Not gone, but smaller. "We end this," Margaret said. "Together." Jonas nodded slowly. Together. They spent the next 2 days planning. Jonas knew Caleb's tactics, knew how he thought, how he moved. Caleb was smart, brutal, and patient. He wouldn't charge in blind. He'd wait, probe, look for weakness, and then he'd strike. "We need to draw him out," Jonas said. "Force him to move before he's ready." "How?" Margaret asked. "We make him think we're vulnerable, broken." Cole leaned forward. "You want to set a trap?" "Yeah." "And use ourselves as bait?" "Yeah." "That's insane." Jonas smiled grimly. "You got a better idea?" Cole didn't. They laid the trap carefully, made it look like half the men had left. Let the perimeter go slack, kept lights burning late, movements visible through the windows, all of it designed to signal weakness. And then they waited. Caleb came on the 5th night. Margaret saw him first, a shadow moving at the edge of the firelight, tall and confident. She rang the bell. Once. The signal. The men moved into position, silent and fast. Caleb stepped into the clearing, hands loose at his sides, a smile on his face. "Jonas," he called. "I know you're in there." Jonas stepped out onto the porch. "Caleb." "Been a long time, brother." "Not long enough." Caleb laughed. It was a warm sound, almost friendly. That made it worse. "You cost me a lot of men," Caleb said. "A lot of money. You'll live." "Will I?" Caleb's smile widened. "See, I'm not so sure about that. Because the thing is, Jonas, you broke the code. And the code says traitors don't get to walk away." "I'm not walking." "No, you're hiding, behind a woman." Caleb's eyes flicked to Margaret. "Pretty thing. Shame she's going to die because of you." Margaret stepped forward, shotgun raised. "Try it." Caleb's smile didn't falter. "Brave. I like that." "I don't care what you like." "You should." Caleb's voice dropped, cold and dangerous. "Because when I'm done with Jonas, I'm coming for you, and I'm going to make it slow." Jonas moved faster than Margaret had ever seen him move. He cleared the porch, shotgun up, and fired. Caleb dove sideways, and the clearing exploded. Gunfire erupted from the tree line, Caleb's men hidden in the dark. But Jonas had expected it. Cole and the others opened up from their positions, cutting into the shadows. Screams, blood, chaos. Margaret fired into the trees, reloaded, fired again. She couldn't see targets, just muzzle flashes and movement. Jonas moved through the gunfire like a ghost, shotgun booming, every shot finding flesh. Caleb was gone, vanished into the dark. Margaret cursed and ran toward the barn where the horses were screaming. She found Caleb inside, torch in hand, flames already licking at the dry wood. "No!" Margaret raised the shotgun. Caleb spun and fired. The bullet grazed her shoulder, spinning her sideways. She hit the ground hard, pain exploding through her body. Caleb stepped closer, gun aimed at her head. "Should have stayed out of it, sweetheart." Then Jonas was there. He tackled Caleb from the side, and they went down in a tangle of limbs and violence. Margaret forced herself up, vision blurring, and grabbed the torch. She threw it outside, into the dirt, then turned back. Jonas and Caleb were on their feet, circling, knives drawn. They moved like dancers, fast, brutal, intimate. They knew each other's rhythms, each other's tells. Caleb struck first, blade flashing. Jonas blocked, countered, drove his knife toward Caleb's throat. Caleb twisted, and the blade caught his shoulder instead. He roared and lunged, slamming Jonas against the barn wall. Margaret raised the shotgun, but they were too close. She couldn't get a clean shot. Caleb's knife came up, aimed at Jonas's heart. Jonas caught his wrist, straining, muscles shaking. Margaret saw her chance. She stepped forward and swung the shotgun like a club, slamming the stock into Caleb's skull. Caleb staggered, and Jonas drove the knife into his chest. Caleb gasped, eyes wide, and dropped to his knees. Jonas pulled the knife free and stepped back. Caleb looked up at him, blood on his lips. "Told you. You didn't have the guts." "I didn't," Jonas said quietly. "But she did." Caleb's eyes flicked to Margaret, something like respect flickering there. Then he fell forward and didn't move. Margaret stood there, breathing hard, shotgun still in her hands. Jonas looked at her. "You all right?" "No." "Yeah, me neither." Outside, the gunfire had stopped. Cole's voice called out, "Clear!" Margaret lowered the shotgun and walked out into the night. The yard was littered with bodies. The men stood in a loose circle, weapons still raised, eyes wild. They'd won. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. Margaret looked at Jonas. He was covered in blood, some his, some Caleb's. "It's over," she said. Jonas nodded. "Yeah." For the first time in weeks, the night was quiet, and Margaret realized something. She wasn't standing beside a stranger anymore. She was standing beside her husband. They buried the bodies at dawn. Margaret stood beside Jonas, watching the men dig graves in the hard earth beyond the property line. Her shoulder throbbed where the bullet had grazed it, but she'd refused to go inside. Refused to look weak. Cole and Sam worked the shovels while Dutch kept watch. The two brothers dragged corpses across the dirt, faces blank, movements mechanical. They'd all seen death before. This was just more of it. Caleb went in last, wrapped in canvas, no ceremony. Jonas stood at the edge of the grave, staring down at the shape of his former brother, and said nothing. Margaret wanted to ask what he was thinking, wanted to offer something, comfort maybe, or understanding. But she knew better. Some grief didn't want company. When it was done, they walked back to the house in silence. The sun climbed higher, turning the sky from gray to pale blue. Birds sang. The world moved on like nothing had happened. Margaret's hands were shaking. She hid them in her pockets. Inside, she poured water into a basin and started cleaning the blood off her arms. The water turned pink, then red. She scrubbed harder, trying to wash away the feeling of Caleb's skull cracking under the shotgun stock. It didn't work. Jonas appeared in the doorway, watching her. "You need stitches." "I'm fine." "You're bleeding through the bandage." Margaret looked down. He was right. Fresh blood seeped through the cloth wrapped around her shoulder. "Sit," Jonas said. "I can do it myself." "Sit." She sat. Jonas pulled a chair close and unwrapped the bandage carefully. The wound wasn't deep, but it was ugly. A long gash where the bullet had torn through skin. He cleaned it with whiskey, and Margaret bit down on her tongue to keep from crying out. "Sorry," Jonas muttered. "Just finish." He stitched her up with the same steady hands he used for everything else. No hesitation, no wasted movement. When he was done, he tied off the thread and wrapped a fresh bandage around her shoulder. "You did good last night," he said quietly. Margaret looked at him. "I killed a man." "You saved my life." "That's not the same thing." Jonas met her eyes. "No, it's not." They sat there for a moment, the weight of it pressing down on both of them. "Does it get easier?" Margaret asked. "No." "Good." She stood, ignoring the pain. "I'd hate to think it should." Jonas almost smiled. "You're tougher than most men I know." "I've had to be." She walked outside, needing air, needing space. The ranch looked like a battlefield, bullet holes in the walls, blood staining the dirt, broken fences and shattered windows. It would take weeks to fix, maybe months, but it was still hers. Cole approached, hat in hand. "We're going to head out." Margaret turned. "What?" "The job's done. You're still breathing. That's what you paid for." "I didn't pay you anything yet." "And we're not asking." Cole glanced at the graves. "This was bigger than we signed up for. We're done." Margaret felt something twist in her chest. Not anger, disappointment. "I thought we had a deal." "We did, and we kept it." Cole looked uncomfortable. "But that man last night, the one Jonas killed, that's the kind of enemy that doesn't quit, and we're not dying for your land." "Fair enough," Margaret said quietly. Cole nodded, relieved. "Sam and Dutch are staying. The brothers too. They're dumb enough to think this is over. And you?" "I'm smart enough to know it's not." He walked away before she could respond. Margaret watched him saddle his horse and ride off, dust trailing behind him. She didn't blame him. He was right. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Jonas came up beside her. "He's scared." "Can you blame him?" "No." Margaret crossed her arms. "So what now? We wait for the next attack?" "No," Jonas said. "We go after them." She looked at him sharply. "What?" "Caleb's dead, but the crew's still out there. They'll regroup. Come back stronger." Jonas's jaw tightened. "We need to end this before they get the chance." "How?" "We find them. Take the fight to them." Margaret stared at him. "That's suicide." "Maybe, but it's better than sitting here waiting to die." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him it was reckless, stupid, exactly the kind of thing that would get them both killed. But she couldn't, because he was right. "How do we find them?" she asked. Jonas looked toward the horizon. "I know where they'd go. There's a canyon about 2 days' ride north. Hideout we used after jobs. If they're anywhere, they're there." "And if they're not? Then we come back and rebuild." Margaret thought about it. About the land, the house, the life she'd fought so hard to keep. About the men who'd just left because they were smart enough to see the danger. And then she thought about Jonas, standing beside her, offering the only thing he had left. Honesty. "All right," she said. "We go." Jonas looked at her, surprise flickering across his face. "You sure?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." They left the next morning. Sam, Dutch, and the brothers stayed behind to guard the ranch. Margaret gave them instructions. Fix the fence, board up the windows, shoot anyone who wasn't her or Jonas. And if you don't come back, Dutch asked, then the land's yours, Margaret said. All of you. Split it however you want. Dutch blinked. You serious? Dead serious, Sam frowned. Why would you do that? Because you stayed. Margaret looked at each of them. And that means something. She and Jonas rode out before anyone could say anything else. The journey north was brutal. The terrain turned rough, all rocks and scrub and hills that seemed designed to break horses. They rode in silence, conserving energy, eyes always scanning for threats. At night, they made camp without fire, ate cold food, took turns sleeping. Margaret found herself watching Jonas when he wasn't looking, the way he moved, the way he checked every shadow, every sound. He'd lived like this for years, always running, always fighting. She wondered what that did to a person. On the second night, she asked him, "What made you join them, the crew?" Jonas didn't answer right away. He sat against a rock, rifle across his lap, staring at the stars. "I was 16, he said finally. No family, no money. Caleb found me trying to steal his horse." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "And he didn't kill you?" "Almost did. But then he laughed and said anyone dumb enough to steal from him was either brave or stupid." Jonas's mouth twitched. "He decided I was brave." "Were you?" "No, I was desperate." Margaret understood that. "So he took you in?" "Yeah, taught me to shoot, to fight, to survive." Jonas's voice went quiet. "He was the closest thing to a brother I ever had." "And you killed him?" "No." Jonas looked at her. "You did." Margaret felt the weight of it settle on her chest. "Does that bother you?" Jonas considered the question. "A year ago? Yeah. It would have destroyed me. And now? Now I'm just glad you were there." Margaret didn't know what to say to that. They reached the canyon at dusk on the third day. It was a jagged scar in the earth, narrow and deep, with cliffs rising on both sides. A thin trail wound down into the shadows, barely wide enough for a horse. Jonas dismounted and studied the ground. Fresh tracks, 3, maybe 4 horses. "They're here." "Yeah." Margaret felt her heart start to pound. "What's the plan?" "We go in quiet, scout the camp, figure out how many we're dealing with. And then?" Jonas checked his rifle. "Then we make them regret coming after us." They left the horses tied in a grove of scrub trees and descended into the canyon on foot. The air grew cooler as they went down, the light fading to gray. Margaret's boots slipped on loose rock, and Jonas caught her arm. "Careful." "I'm fine." "You fall and break your neck. This whole trip's wasted." Margaret almost laughed. Almost. They moved slowly, using the rocks for cover. The canyon opened up ahead, and Margaret saw the camp. 3 tents, a fire burning low, horses tethered nearby, and 4 men. Jonas counted under his breath. 4. Could be more in the tents. Can we take them? If we're smart. Margaret scanned the camp. 2 men sat by the fire, talking quietly. Another stood watch near the horses. The 4th was nowhere to be seen. "We need to wait until dark," Jonas whispered. "Catch them when they're sleeping." Margaret nodded. They settled into position behind a boulder, close enough to watch, far enough to stay hidden. And they waited. Hours passed. The sun set completely, and the canyon filled with darkness. The men by the fire eventually stood, stretched, and disappeared into the tents. The guard changed. A new man took his place, yawning, leaning against a rock. Jonas touched Margaret's arm. "Now." They moved like shadows, slow and silent. Margaret's heart hammered so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. Jonas went left, toward the guard. Margaret circled right, toward the tents. She heard a soft sound, a grunt, a thud. The guard was down. Margaret reached the first tent and pulled back the flap. A man lay inside, snoring, gun within reach. She hesitated. Could she do this? Kill a man in his sleep? Then she thought of Caleb, of the men who'd attacked her ranch, of the threat that would never end if she didn't finish it. She raised her knife and drove it into his throat. The man's eyes flew open, wide and shocked, but he didn't scream. Couldn't. Just gurgled and went still. Margaret pulled the knife free, hands shaking, bile rising in her throat. She moved to the second tent. Another man. This one woke as she entered. What? She shot him. The gunshot cracked through the canyon like thunder. Immediately, the camp exploded. Men poured out of the tents, guns drawn, shouting. Margaret dove behind a rock as bullets tore through the air. Jonas appeared beside her, firing into the chaos. So much for quiet. He woke up. Yeah, I noticed. Margaret reloaded and fired back. One man dropped. Another took cover behind the horses. The third man charged them, screaming, knife raised. Jonas shot him in the chest. Silence. Margaret stood slowly, breathing hard, looking around. 4 men. All dead. Is that all of them? She asked. Jonas walked through the camp, checking bodies, checking tents. Yeah, that's it. Margaret felt her legs give out. She sat down hard, back against a rock, and put her head in her hands. I killed 2 men tonight. Jonas crouched beside her. I know. One of them was asleep. I know. Does that make me a murderer? Jonas was quiet for a moment. It makes you a survivor. Margaret looked at him. Is there a difference? Yeah, Jonas said. Murderers enjoy it. She didn't enjoy it. She felt sick, hollowed out, but she'd done it anyway. They searched the camp and found a lockbox hidden under one of the tents. Inside was money, a lot of it. Stolen from jobs, Margaret guessed, enough to rebuild the ranch twice over. Jonas stared at it. This was supposed to be my share, from the last job I walked away from. And now it's ours. He looked at her. You sure? They're dead. We're not. That makes it ours. Margaret closed the box. We take it. We rebuild. We move on. Jonas nodded slowly. All right. They rode back to the ranch with the money and 4 fewer enemies in the world, but the victory felt hollow. When they arrived, the men greeted them with relief and questions. Margaret answered what she could, left out the parts that didn't matter. That night, she sat on the porch, staring at the horizon, feeling the weight of everything pressing down. Jonas sat beside her. You all right? No. Yeah, me neither. They sat in silence for a long time. I keep thinking about that man, Margaret said quietly, the one I killed in his sleep. Don't. I can't help it. Jonas turned to look at her. You did what you had to do, to survive, to protect this place. That's all that matters. Is it? It has to be. Margaret wasn't sure she believed that, but she wanted to. What happens now? She asked. Jonas looked out at the land. We rebuild. We live. We try to forget. Can we? I don't know. He paused. But we can try. Margaret nodded. Yeah, we can try. The days that followed were strange, quiet, almost normal. They rebuilt the barn, fixed the fences, planted new crops. The men worked hard and Margaret paid them fairly. Life started to feel possible again. But something had changed between her and Jonas. The distance that had existed before, the cold, functional partnership, was gone. Now, when he looked at her, she saw something else. Recognition, respect, maybe even trust. One night, after the men had gone to bed, Margaret found Jonas outside, staring at the stars. Can't sleep? She asked. Never could. She stood beside him. You thinking about Caleb? Always. Do you regret it? Jonas didn't answer right away. I regret that it had to happen, but I don't regret that he's gone. Margaret understood that. He would have killed us. Yeah. So we did the right thing. Yeah. But the word felt heavy. Margaret took a breath. Jonas, I need to ask you something. He looked at her. When this started, you said when it was over, you'd leave. Jonas's expression didn't change. Yeah. Is it over? He thought about it. I don't know. Maybe. And if it is? Jonas turned to face her fully. You want me to go? Margaret's heart pounded. No. The word hung in the air between them. Jonas stared at her, something shifting in his eyes. Margaret, I know what I said. I know what we agreed to.
Margaret's voice was steady. But things changed. We changed.
And I don't want you to leave. Why not? Because I need you. She paused. Not because of the land. Not because of the law. Because you're the only person who's ever stood beside me and treated me like an equal. Jonas looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "You're the strongest person I've ever met." Margaret felt something crack open in her chest. "We make a good team," she said quietly. "Yeah," Jonas agreed. "We do." He reached out and took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her that wasn't about survival or necessity. It felt like a beginning. "I'm staying," he said. Margaret squeezed his hand. "Good." They stood there under the stars, two people who'd been forced together by law and circumstance, now choosing each other freely. And for the first time since her husband died, Margaret felt something other than anger or fear. She felt hope. But peace was a fragile thing on the frontier, and neither of them saw the storm coming. It started a week later when a stranger rode into town asking questions. Margaret heard about it from Dutch, who'd gone in for supplies. "Man in a suit, fancy, asking about you and Jonas, wanted to know about the fight, about Caleb." Margaret's stomach dropped. What did people tell him? Enough. Dutch shifted uncomfortably. "He's staying at the hotel, offered money for information." "What kind of man?" "The kind that doesn't get his hands dirty, but pays others to do it." Margaret found Jonas in the barn. "We have a problem." She told him about the stranger. Jonas's face went hard. "It started." "What has?" "The reckoning." Jonas set down the hammer he'd been using. "Caleb had connections, people who backed him, people with money. You think they sent someone?" "I know they did." Margaret felt the fear creeping back. "So we're not done." "We're never done." Jonas looked at her. "Not until we cut off the head." "And who's the head?" Jonas's jaw tightened. "A man named Silas Crane. Rich, powerful, owns half the territory. He funded our crew, took a cut of everything we stole. And now he wants revenge. No, he wants his investment back, and he'll burn this whole town to get it." Margaret's mind raced. "Then we go to the law. We tell them what? That an outlaw crew worked for a rich man? They won't care. Crane owns the judges, the sheriffs, everyone." Jonas shook his head. "The law won't help us." "Then what do we do?" Jonas looked at her, and she saw the decision forming in his eyes. "We go after him, before he comes after us." Margaret felt the weight of it. "You want to kill him?" "I want to survive. And the only way we do that is if he's dead. That's murder. That's war." Margaret wanted to argue, wanted to find another way. But deep down, she knew he was right. They'd crossed a line, and there was no going back. "How do we find him?" she asked. "I know where he lives, big estate outside Carson City. Guards, walls, but not impossible." "When do we leave?" Jonas looked surprised. "You're coming? You think I'm staying here?" Margaret crossed her arms. "We're in this together. Remember?" Jonas studied her, then nodded. Together. They left 2 days later, telling the men they were going for supplies. It was a lie, but a necessary one. The ride to Carson City took 3 days. They traveled light, stayed off main roads, avoided towns. When they finally saw Crane's estate, Margaret understood the scope of what they were facing. It was a fortress. High walls, armed guards patrolling, a mansion at the center, gleaming white against the desert. "How do we get in?" Margaret asked. Jonas scanned the perimeter. "We don't. We wait for him to come out. And if he doesn't, then we make him." They set up camp in the hills overlooking the estate and watched. Guards changed shifts every 4 hours. Servants came and went, but Crane himself never appeared. On the 3rd day, Jonas said, "We need to draw him out." "How?" Jonas looked at her. "You're not going to like it." He was right. She didn't, but she agreed anyway. The plan was simple. Margaret would ride up to the gate, claim to be a widow looking for work, get inside, cause a distraction. And when Crane came to investigate, Jonas would be waiting. It was reckless, stupid, exactly the kind of thing that would get them killed, but they were out of options. Margaret rode up to the gate the next morning, heart pounding, hands steady on the reins. The guards stopped her. "State your business." "I'm looking for work." Heard Mr. Crane might need help. The guards exchanged looks. What kind of work? Any kind. I'm a widow. I can cook, clean, manage a household. One guard went inside to check. The other watched her carefully. Minutes passed. Margaret forced herself to breathe normally. Finally, the guard returned. Mr. Crane will see you. Leave your weapons. Margaret handed over her rifle, kept the knife hidden in her boot. They led her through the grounds, past gardens and fountains, to the mansion's entrance. Inside, everything was polished and perfect. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, the kind of wealth that came from other people's suffering. A man appeared at the top of the stairs. Tall, silver-haired, immaculately dressed. Silas Crane. Mrs.? He asked, descending. Hale, Margaret said. Margaret Hale. Crane's eyes sharpened. Hale. That name sounds familiar. Margaret's pulse quickened. It's common enough. Perhaps? Crane studied her. You said you're looking for work? Yes, sir. And what makes you think I need help? A man like you always needs help. Crane smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. You're bold. I like that. He gestured for her to follow. They walked through the house, and Crane talked about his business, his holdings, his power. Margaret listened, looking for weaknesses, looking for angles. And then Crane said, I had some business associates recently. Dangerous men. They're all dead now. Margaret's blood ran cold. That's unfortunate, she said carefully. Yes. Very. Crane stopped and turned to face her. Tell me, Mrs. Hale, do you know a man named Jonas Reed? Margaret's hand drifted toward her boot. No. Liar. Guards appeared from the shadows, guns drawn. Crane smiled. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize you? The woman who married Jonas Reed, who helped him kill Caleb? Margaret's mind raced. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. Crane stepped closer. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me where Jonas is, and then you're going to watch while I kill him. Go to hell. Crane's smile widened. I was hoping you'd say that. He nodded to the guards. They grabbed Margaret, dragging her toward the door. She fought, kicking, screaming, but there were too many. And then gunfire erupted outside. The guards froze. Crane's face went pale. Jonas. Margaret drove her elbow into one guard's face, grabbed the other's gun, and shot him. She ran toward the sound of gunfire. Outside, Jonas was a storm. He moved through the guards like they were nothing, shotgun booming, knife flashing. Margaret joined him, firing as she ran. Together they fought their way through the estate, leaving bodies in their wake. Crane tried to run. Jonas caught him at the back gate, grabbed him by the collar, and slammed him against the wall. Please, Crane gasped. I'll pay you anything you want. I don't want your money, Jonas said. Then what do you want? Jonas looked at Margaret. She stepped forward, gun raised. We want you dead, she said, and she pulled the trigger. Crane slumped to the ground, eyes wide, a hole in his chest. Margaret lowered the gun, breathing hard. Jonas looked at her. You all right? No. She met his eyes. But I will be. They rode away from the burning estate, leaving the bodies and the blood behind. And for the first time, Margaret believed they might actually survive this. They didn't stop riding until the estate was nothing but smoke on the horizon. Margaret's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the reins. She kept seeing Crane's face. The moment the bullet hit, the way his eyes went wide, the blood spreading across his white shirt. She'd killed him, shot him point blank, watched him die. And the worst part was that she'd meant every word she'd said. Jonas glanced at her. We need to keep moving. I know. Someone heard those shots. They'll be coming. Margaret nodded but didn't speak. Her throat felt tight, her chest heavy. She'd crossed a line back there. Not just killed in self-defense or in the heat of battle, but executed a man in cold blood. She'd become exactly what the frontier demanded. They rode hard for 2 days, sleeping in shifts, eating whatever they could scavenge. Jonas led them through back trails and dry riverbeds, places where trackers would lose the scent. On the third night, they made camp in a shallow cave, finally far enough away to risk a small fire. Margaret sat with her back against the stone wall, staring at the flames. Jonas crouched nearby, checking their ammunition. We can't go back, he said quietly. Margaret looked at him. What? To the ranch. We can't go back. Not yet. Why not? Because Crane had people, partners. And when they find out he's dead, they'll come looking. Jonas set down the bullets. We go back now. We lead them straight to the men we left behind. Margaret's stomach twisted. She hadn't thought about that. So what do? We disappear for a while. Let things cool down. Then we come back when it's safe. And the ranch? The land? Dutch and the others will hold it. They're good men. Margaret wanted to argue, wanted to say they'd fought too hard to run now. But she knew he was right. Going back would just get everyone killed. How long? She asked. Couple months, maybe more. Margaret closed her eyes. I hate this. Yeah, me too. They sat in silence, listening to the fire crackle. Finally, Margaret said, Where do we go? Jonas looked at her. Mexico. I know people there. We can lay low, wait it out. And then? Then we come home. Home. The word felt strange. Margaret had thought of the ranch as home, the land, the house, the life she'd built. But sitting here in this cave, with Jonas beside her and danger at their backs, she realized home wasn't a place. It was a person. All right, she said. Mexico. They crossed the border a week later. The landscape changed. Drier, harsher, more unforgiving. Small villages dotted the hillsides, and people watched them pass with careful eyes. Jonas led them to a town called San Miguel, a dusty collection of adobe buildings clustered around a central plaza. They found a small inn run by an old woman who asked no questions and took their money without counting it. The room was sparse, a bed, a chair, a window overlooking the street. Margaret dropped her saddlebag on the floor and sat down heavily. Now what? She asked. Now we wait. For how long? As long as it takes. Margaret looked at him. I'm not good at waiting. Jonas almost smiled. I noticed. The days blurred together. They kept to themselves, avoided attention, moved through the town like ghosts. Jonas found work repairing wagons. Margaret helped in the inn's kitchen, earning their keep. It was quiet, almost peaceful. But Margaret felt like she was holding her breath. At night, they shared the small room, and the space between them grew smaller. They'd been through too much together to maintain the cold distance they'd started with. One night, Margaret woke to find Jonas sitting by the window, staring out at the dark street. Can't sleep? She asked. Never can. She got up and sat beside him. What are you thinking about? Jonas didn't answer right away. Then he said, I keep wondering if we did the right thing. Killing Crane? All of it. The fighting, the running, the blood. He looked at her. Sometimes I think we should have just let it happen. Let them take the land. Walk away. Margaret shook her head. You don't believe that. Don't I? No, because if you did, you wouldn't have stayed. You would have left the first time things got hard. Jonas was quiet for a long moment. Why did you ask me to stay? Back at the ranch. After Caleb. Margaret considered the question. Because you were the first person who didn't try to take something from me. You offered a trade, an honest one, and then you kept your word. That's all? No. Margaret met his eyes. You made me feel like an equal, like I mattered, not because of the land or the law, but because of who I am. Jonas looked at her, something shifting in his expression. You're the strongest person I've ever met. You said that before. I meant it then. I mean it now. Margaret felt something tighten in her chest. Jonas, he leaned forward and kissed her. It wasn't gentle, wasn't soft. It was desperate and raw and real, all the fear and anger and need they'd been carrying finally breaking free. Margaret kissed him back, hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. I didn't plan that, Jonas said quietly. I don't care. This changes things. Good. Margaret looked at him. I want them to change. Jonas searched her face, then kissed her again, and this time they didn't stop. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, the room dark except for the moonlight streaming through the window. Margaret rested her head on Jonas's chest, listening to his heartbeat. Do you think we'll ever be safe? I don't know. That's not very reassuring. You want me to lie? Margaret smiled. No, I want you to be honest. Jonas's hand traced slow circles on her back. Then honestly, I don't know. But I know I'll fight like hell to keep you alive. And I'll do the same for you. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, two people who'd been forged in fire and blood into something stronger than either of them alone. But peace was temporary on the frontier, and the past had one more card to play. It came 2 months later in the form of a letter. Margaret was in the market buying vegetables when a rider stopped her. You Margaret Reed? She tensed. Who's asking? Got a message from the north, said to find you here. He handed her an envelope. Margaret took it, heart pounding. Who sent this? Didn't say, just told me where to find you and to make sure you got it. He rode off before she could ask anything else. Margaret turned the envelope over. No name, no return address, just her name written in a hand she didn't recognize. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 sentences. Your ranch is burning, your men are dead. Come home and face what you've done. Margaret's blood went cold. She ran back to the inn, legs pumping, lungs burning. Jonas was in the room, cleaning his rifle. We have to go, she said, shoving the letter at him. Jonas read it, and his face went hard. Could be a trap. Could be the truth. Either way, it's designed to draw us out. I don't care. Margaret was already packing. If there's even a chance Dutch and the others are in danger, we have to go. Jonas stood. Margaret, I'm going, with or without you. Jonas stared at her, then nodded. All right, we go. But we go smart. They rode out within the hour. The journey back took 2 weeks of hard riding. They pushed the horses to the edge of endurance, stopping only when absolutely necessary. Margaret's mind raced the entire time. If the letter was true, if the ranch was gone, if the men were dead, it was her fault. She'd left them behind, she'd run, and now they were paying for it. Jonas tried to talk to her, tried to tell her it wasn't her fault, but she wouldn't hear it. She'd made a choice, and choices had consequences. They reached the property at dusk. Margaret saw the smoke first, a thin column rising from where the barn should be. Her heart sank. They rode closer, and the devastation came into view. The barn was a burned-out shell. The house had scorch marks up one side. Fences were broken. Blood stained the dirt, but there were no bodies. Margaret dismounted and ran toward the house, calling out, Dutch! Sam! Anyone! Silence. Jonas checked the barn while Margaret searched the house. Everything was ransacked, furniture overturned, drawers pulled out, anything of value taken. But still no bodies. Margaret walked back outside, chest tight, trying to understand. Jonas appeared from the barn. Tracks lead north, recent, maybe 2 days old. How many? 5 horses. Heavy loaded. Margaret's mind worked through it. They took them. Yeah. Why? Bait. Jonas looked at her. This whole thing is a trap. Burn the ranch, take the men, leave a trail we can follow. They're waiting for us. Then we'll give them what they want. Jonas grabbed her arm. Margaret, this is what they want. They want us angry, want us reckless. We walk into that trap, we die. And if we don't, Dutch and the others die. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Margaret pulled her arm free. Those men stayed when everyone else left. They fought for us. For this land, I'm not abandoning them. Even if it kills you? Even then, Jonas stared at her, jaw tight, and she saw the war in his eyes. The part of him that wanted to run, to survive, fighting against the part that understood loyalty. Finally, he said, All right, we go, but we do it my way. What's your way? We don't walk into the trap, we spring it on our terms. They followed the tracks north through the night. The trail was obvious, too obvious. Whoever took the men wanted to be followed. Jonas led them off the main path, circling wide, approaching from an angle. At dawn, they found the camp. It was in a box canyon, steep walls on 3 sides, only one way in or out. 5 men sat around a fire. And tied to posts near the back were Dutch, Sam, and the brothers, alive but beaten. Margaret felt relief and rage in equal measure. How do we do this? She whispered. Jonas studied the layout. I go in from above. You stay here and cover the entrance. When I start shooting, you make sure no one gets out. That's suicide. Got a better idea? Margaret didn't. Jonas checked his weapons. Give me 10 minutes to get into position, then wait for my signal. What's the signal? You'll know. He disappeared into the rocks, moving silent as a shadow. Margaret settled into position, rifle ready, heart pounding. She watched the men below, watched Dutch and the others, and felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on her. This was her fault, her choice, her consequences. Minutes ticked by. The sun climbed higher, then a gunshot cracked from above. One of the men by the fire dropped, blood blooming from his chest. Chaos erupted. The others scattered, grabbing weapons, looking for the source. Margaret fired from her position, dropping another. Jonas appeared on the cliff above, raining bullets down on the camp. The remaining men returned fire, pinned between two shooters. It was over in less than a minute. 4 men dead, 1 wounded, crawling toward his horse. Margaret walked down into the canyon, rifle raised. Jonas climbed down from the rocks and put a bullet in the wounded man's head. Then they ran to Dutch and the others. You all right? Margaret asked, cutting Dutch's ropes. Dutch rubbed his wrists, wincing. Been better. Thought you two were dead. We thought the same about you. Sam stood, shaky but alive. They came 3 days ago, burned the barn, said they'd kill us if we didn't come with them. Who were they? Jonas asked. Didn't say, just said we were bait. Margaret looked around the canyon. Where's the person who sent the letter? Dutch frowned. What letter? Before Margaret could answer, a voice called out from above. Right here. Margaret spun, rifle up. A woman stood on the canyon rim, silhouetted against the sun, tall, confident, a rifle of her own slung over her shoulder. Who are you? Margaret demanded. The woman descended into the canyon, and as she got closer, Margaret saw her face clearly. She was beautiful in a hard way, scars on her hands, eyes like steel. Name's Sarah Rourke, the woman said. Caleb's sister. Margaret's blood ran cold. Sarah smiled, but it was empty. Surprised? Don't be. Caleb had family, and family doesn't forget. Jonas stepped forward. Sarah, I didn't know you were still alive. Yeah, well, I didn't advertise. Sarah's eyes flicked to Margaret. So you're the one who killed my brother? Margaret raised her chin. Yes. Good. Sarah's smile widened. Saves me the trouble of killing him myself. Margaret blinked. What? Sarah lowered her rifle. Caleb was a monster, killed our parents, killed my husband, tried to kill me when I wouldn't join his crew. She looked at Jonas. You did me a favor. Jonas looked confused. Then why all this? The letter? The trap? Because I needed to know if you were worth it. Worth what? Sarah gestured to the dead men. These were the last of Crane's people. Been hunting you for months. I tracked them, followed them here, let them set their trap. Why? To see if you'd come. If you'd risk everything for people who aren't even blood. Sarah looked at Margaret. And you did. Both of you. Margaret lowered her rifle slowly. I don't understand. You don't have to. Sarah walked toward her horse. The war's over. Crane's dead. His people are dead. Caleb's dead. You're free. Jonas stepped forward. Just like that? Sarah mounted her horse. Just like that. Go home. Rebuild. Live. She looked at Margaret. You earned it. Why help us? Margaret asked. Sarah smiled, sad this time. Because someone should get a happy ending, even if it's not me. She rode off, leaving them standing in the canyon surrounded by bodies and questions. Dutch broke the silence. What the hell just happened? Margaret looked at Jonas. I have no idea. They buried the bodies and rode back to the ranch. The damage was extensive but not irreparable. The barn could be rebuilt. The house could be fixed. The land was still theirs. They spent the next month rebuilding. All of them. Margaret, Jonas, Dutch, Sam, the brothers. Working side by side, dawn to dusk, turning wreckage into something whole. And slowly, life began to feel possible again. One night, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jonas said, Do you think it's really over? Margaret considered it. I don't know, but I think we're allowed to hope. Hope's dangerous. So is breathing. She leaned against him. But we do it anyway. Jonas put his arm around her. What do we do now? We live. We build. We try to be normal.
We've never been normal. Margaret smiled. Then we'll be our own kind of normal. They sat there as the sun set, painting the sky red and gold. The frontier stretched out before them, vast and unforgiving and beautiful. They'd survived. Against all odds, against all enemies, they'd survived. But Margaret knew the truth. The frontier never stopped testing you, never stopped demanding payment in blood and sacrifice. All you could do was stand your ground and fight. And that's exactly what they'd do. Together. But the past wasn't done with them yet. 1 week later, a package arrived. Margaret found it on the porch, a small wooden box with her name carved into the lid. No note, no explanation. Jonas was in the barn. Margaret called him over. "You recognize this?" she asked. Jonas studied the box, frowning. "No." Margaret opened it carefully. Inside was a stack of papers, legal documents, deeds, contracts, all of them bearing Silas Crane's signature, and all of them transferring ownership of his holdings, mines, railroads, land, to Margaret Hale Reed. At the bottom was a handwritten note. "You killed the king. Now you wear the crown. Use it wisely. S.R. Sarah Rourke." Sarah. Margaret stared at the documents, mind reeling. This wasn't just money. This was power, influence, everything Crane had built through blood and corruption, now hers. Jonas looked at her. "What are you going to do?" Margaret thought about it. About the woman she'd been when this started, desperate, trapped, powerless. And the woman she was now, scarred, dangerous, free. She thought about the frontier, about the people who suffered under men like Crane, about the chance to change things. "I'm going to use it," she said finally. "But not like he did, not to hurt people, to help them." Jonas studied her. "That's going to make you enemies." "I know." "You sure you want that fight?" Margaret looked at him, at the ranch, at the life they'd built from ashes and blood. "I've been fighting my whole life," she said. "Might as well fight for something that matters." Jonas nodded slowly. "Then I'm with you. Even if it gets us killed, even then." Margaret closed the box and stood. "Then let's get started." They walked back to the house together, side by side, equals in every way that mattered. The war wasn't over. It would never be over. But they were ready. And this time, they were fighting on their own terms. The first thing Margaret did with Crane's fortune was pay off every debt in town. She walked into the bank 3 days after receiving the documents, placed the deeds on Samuel Doerr's desk, and watched his face go pale. "These are Silas Crane's holdings, and now they're mine." Margaret leaned forward. "Which means every loan he held, every foreclosure he engineered, every family he ruined, I own all of it." Doerr's hand shook as he shuffled through the papers. "What do you want?" "I want you to forgive them. Every single debt, every mortgage, every loan. I can't just—" "You can, and you will." Margaret's voice was steel. "Or I'll call in every marker Crane had on this bank and shut you down by Friday." Doerr stared at her, sweat beading on his forehead. "You're insane." "No, I'm done watching people suffer while men like you get rich off their misery." Margaret straightened. "You have until tomorrow. Make it happen." She walked out, leaving Doerr sputtering behind her. Word spread fast. By that evening, half the town knew. By the next morning, everyone did. Margaret became a different kind of target. Not someone to destroy, but someone to fear and respect in equal measure. Jonas watched it happen with a mixture of pride and concern. "You're making enemies," he said one night as they sat on the porch. "I know. Powerful ones, rich ones." "Good. Let them come." Margaret looked at him. "I spent my whole life being powerless, being told what I could and couldn't do, being forced into corners." She paused. "I'm done with that. If they want to fight, I'll give them one." Jonas studied her. "You've changed. So have you." He smiled slightly. "Yeah, I guess I have." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out. The ranch was almost fully rebuilt. New barn, repaired fences, fresh paint on the house. It looked like a home again. But Margaret knew appearances were deceiving. The real work was just beginning. Over the next 2 months, Margaret dismantled Crane's empire piece by piece. She sold the mines to the workers who'd been trapped in them, gave land back to families who'd lost it to foreclosure, used the railroad holdings to negotiate fair wages for laborers. Every action made someone angry. Every decision created opposition.
Richard Kane showed up at the ranch one afternoon, face red with fury.
"You're destroying everything," he shouted.
"Crane built an empire, and you're giving it away to people who don't deserve it." Margaret stood on the porch, arms crossed. "People who don't deserve it? You mean people who actually work for a living?" "You know what I mean. The weak, the failures, the ones who can't make it on their own." "Like I couldn't?" Margaret's voice was quiet, dangerous. "When you tried to force me off my land? When you threatened me?" Kane's jaw tightened. "That was business." "No, that was bullying." Margaret stepped closer. "And I'm done being bullied. By you. By anyone." "You think you're untouchable now? Because you have money?" "No, because I have something you'll never understand." Margaret met his eyes. "I have people who stand with me. Not because I pay them, because they choose to." Kane stared at her, then turned and stormed off. Jonas appeared from the barn. "He'll be back." "I know. With more than words." "I know that too." Jonas looked at her. "You ready for this?" Margaret thought about everything she'd survived. The forced marriage, the attacks, the killing, the running, all of it leading to this moment. "Yeah," she said. "I'm ready." The attack came a week later. Margaret was in town when she heard the gunshots, sharp cracks echoing from the direction of the ranch. Her blood turned to ice. She ran for her horse, ignoring the people shouting questions. Jonas was at the ranch, Dutch and the others, everyone she cared about. She rode faster than she ever had, pushing the mare to the edge of collapse. When she crested the hill and saw the ranch, her heart nearly stopped. Fire. Smoke. Men on horseback circling the property, firing at the house. Kane's men. She recognized some of them. Margaret didn't slow down. She rode straight into the chaos, rifle up, firing as she charged. One rider went down, then another. The others turned toward her, and bullets tore through the air. Margaret felt one graze her leg, another tear through her coat. She didn't stop. Jonas burst out of the house, shotgun blazing. Dutch and Sam covered the windows. The brothers fired from the barn. Together they drove the attackers back. The riders scattered, 3 dead, the rest fleeing. Margaret dismounted, leg bleeding, and ran to Jonas. "You hit?" he demanded. "Just grazed. You?" "I'm fine." Jonas scanned the property. "That was just the first wave." "How many more?" "Don't know, but Kane's not going to stop." Margaret's mind raced. This wasn't sustainable. They couldn't fight off wave after wave. Eventually, they'd run out of ammunition or luck or both. They needed to end this permanently. "Where's Kane now?" she asked. "His ranch, 10 miles north." Margaret looked at Jonas. "Then we go after him, tonight." "Margaret, I'm done reacting, done waiting for the next attack." Her voice was hard. "We end this now, or we die trying." Jonas stared at her, then nodded. "All right, we end it." They left at midnight, just the two of them. Dutch and the others stayed to guard the property. The ride to Kane's ranch was tense and silent. Margaret's leg throbbed, but she ignored it. Pain was just noise. They approached from the east, using the darkness for cover. Kane's ranch was big, bigger than Margaret's, with a sprawling house and multiple outbuildings. Lights burned in the main house. Shadows moved behind curtains. Jonas pointed to the barn. "Horses first. Cut off their escape." They split up. Margaret crept to the barn, found the horses, and quietly led them out into the night. Let them scatter across the prairie. No pursuit. No retreat. Jonas met her at the back of the house. "Ready?" Margaret checked her rifle. "Ready." They kicked in the back door and stormed inside. Kane's men scrambled, reaching for weapons, but Jonas and Margaret were faster. Gunfire erupted, close, deafening, brutal. 2 men dropped. A third tried to run and caught a bullet in the back. Margaret moved through the house like a force of nature, clearing rooms, eliminating threats. She'd become something she never thought she'd be, a killer, efficient, ruthless. But she didn't enjoy it. She just did what needed to be done. They found Kane in his office, hiding behind his desk, gun in hand. Jonas stepped forward, shotgun leveled. "It's over, Kane." Kane's face was twisted with rage and fear. "You think killing me solves anything? There are others, more powerful than me. They'll come for you." "Let them," Margaret said, stepping into view. "I'm not afraid anymore." "You should be. Kane raised his gun. Jonas fired first. Kane slumped against the desk, blood spreading across his chest. He looked at Margaret, eyes wide, confused. "You are nothing," he gasped. "A widow, powerless." "I was," Margaret said quietly, "but you made me into something else." Kane's eyes went blank. Margaret lowered her rifle and walked out. Jonas followed. Behind them, Kane's ranch burned. They'd set it alight on their way out. Scorched earth, total destruction. A message to anyone else who thought they could take what wasn't theirs. They rode back to their ranch as the sun rose, painting the sky blood red. When they arrived, Dutch and the others were waiting, tense and armed. "It's done," Jonas said simply. Dutch exhaled. "For real this time?" "For real." Sam looked at Margaret. "What now?" Margaret dismounted, wincing as her leg protested. "Now we rebuild. Again, and we keep rebuilding until it sticks." Over the following months, something unexpected happened. People came to Margaret, not to threaten or intimidate, but to ask for help. Widows who'd lost their homes, families drowning in debt, workers cheated out of wages. Margaret helped them all. She used Crane's fortune to build schools, to fund hospitals, to create opportunities for people who'd never had them. The town changed, slowly at first, then faster. The desperate edge that had defined it softened. People started looking forward instead of just surviving day to day. And Margaret changed too. The hard, brittle woman who'd stood in the courthouse all those months ago, angry, scared, alone, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, not because she'd stopped feeling fear, but because she'd learned to act despite it. Jonas noticed. Everyone did. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, he said, "You know people are calling you the Iron Widow now." Margaret smiled slightly. "I've heard. How do you feel about that?" "I don't know. Depends on the day." She looked at him. "What do you think?" "I think you're the most remarkable person I've ever met." Margaret felt something warm spread through her chest. "You're not so bad yourself." Jonas took her hand. "I've been thinking." "About what?" "About us. About this." He gestured to the ranch, the land, everything they'd built. "We got married because the law forced you, because you needed protection and I needed a place." Margaret's heart started to pound. "I remember." "That's not why I'm here anymore," Jonas said quietly. "I'm here because I choose to be. Because I can't imagine being anywhere else." Margaret turned to face him fully. "What are you saying?" Jonas stood and pulled her to her feet. "I'm saying we started this as strangers forced together by circumstance. But that's not what we are now." "No? No." Jonas looked at her, and for the first time she saw everything in his eyes. The fear, the hope, the love he'd been too scared to name. "I love you, Margaret. Not because I have to, because I want to." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. "Jonas, marry me," he said. "For real this time. Not because of the law or the land, because we choose each other." Margaret couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. All she could do was nod. Jonas smiled, a real smile, the kind she'd never seen on his face before, and kissed her. When they pulled apart, Margaret said, "I love you too. I think I have for a while. I was just too stubborn to admit it." "You? Stubborn? Never." She laughed, and it felt like breaking open, like letting go of all the weight she'd been carrying. They got married a month later, not in the courthouse with a judge who didn't care. In the valley below the ranch, under the open sky, with everyone who mattered standing witness. Dutch stood as Jonas's best man. Sam gave Margaret away. The brothers played fiddle. Half the town showed up, bringing food and music and joy. It was nothing like the first wedding. That had been cold, transactional, born of desperation. This was warm, chosen, real. When the ceremony was over and the celebration began, Margaret pulled Jonas aside. "You know this doesn't mean things will be easy," she said. "I know. There will still be fights, still be people who want to take what we've built." "I know that too." Margaret smiled. "And you're still choosing this?" Jonas pulled her close. "Every day, for the rest of my life." They danced as the sun set, surrounded by people they'd fought beside and bled for. People who'd become family not through blood, but through choice. And for the first time in her life, Margaret felt truly free. Not because the danger was gone, it would never be gone. The frontier didn't allow for that kind of peace, but because she'd stopped being afraid of it. She'd learned that strength wasn't about being fearless. It was about being scared and fighting anyway. About standing up when it would be easier to fall. About choosing hope even when hope seemed foolish. The frontier had tried to break her, had thrown everything at her. Loss, violence, betrayal, blood. But she was still standing, and she wasn't standing alone. Months turned into years. The ranch thrived. The town grew. Margaret's influence spread, and with it, real change. Fair wages, property rights for women, schools in every settlement. Not everyone approved. There were still fights, still threats. But Margaret and Jonas faced them together side by side, equals in every way. They had children, 2 daughters who inherited their mother's fire and their father's steady calm. Girls who grew up knowing they could be anything, do anything, because they'd seen their mother reshape the world through sheer force of will. And every night, Margaret and Jonas sat on that same porch, watching the sunset, holding hands. Sometimes they talked about the past, about Caleb and Crane and all the blood they'd spilled, about the people they'd been and the people they'd become. Other times they sat in silence, just being together. One evening, years after that second wedding, their eldest daughter asked Margaret a question. "Mama, were you scared when all those bad things happened?" Margaret thought about standing in the courthouse, helpless and furious, about the wolves and the gunfights and the killings, about every moment when she'd thought she wouldn't survive. "Yes," she said honestly, "I was terrified. But you did it anyway." "I did it anyway. Why?" Margaret looked at Jonas, at her daughters, at the life they'd built from ashes and determination. "Because I learned something important," she said. "Fear doesn't have to stop you. It can just be something you carry while you do what needs to be done." Her daughter thought about that. "Did it get easier?" "No," Margaret said, "but I got stronger." And that was the truth of it. The frontier hadn't made her soft or safe. It had made her steel. Had shown her that survival wasn't about avoiding pain, but about enduring it. About finding people worth fighting for and holding on to them with everything you had. Margaret had been forced into a marriage she didn't want. Forced to fight battles she never asked for. Forced to become someone she never thought she'd be. But somewhere along the way, the force had become choice. She'd chosen to fight, chosen to love, chosen to build instead of break. And that choice had made all the difference. Years later, when Margaret was old and gray, sitting on that same porch with Jonas beside her, both of them scarred and weathered, but still standing, someone asked her what she'd learned from it all. She thought for a long time before answering. "I learned that you can't control what happens to you," she said finally. "The frontier takes what it wants. Life breaks you down. People hurt you. The law fails you." She paused, looking out at the land she'd fought so hard to keep. "But you can control what you do about it. You can choose to break or bend, to run or stand, to surrender or fight." She glanced at Jonas, and he squeezed her hand. "I chose to fight, and I found someone who chose to fight beside me." "Was it worth it?" the person asked. "All the pain? All the blood?" Margaret looked at her daughters, grown now with families of their own. At the town she'd helped rebuild. At the land that had demanded everything from her and given back just enough to make it worthwhile. At Jonas, still beside her after all these years, still choosing her every single day. "Yes," she said quietly. "It was worth it." Because in the end, that was the only truth that mattered. They'd survived. They'd built something real. They'd turned force into choice and obligation into love. The frontier had tried to destroy them. Instead, they'd conquered it. Not through violence or wealth or power, though they'd needed all three, but through something simpler and harder. They'd survived by refusing to give up. By standing together when standing alone would have been easier. By choosing each other over and over, no matter the cost. And in a world that tried to take everything, that choice was the greatest victory of all. Margaret died peacefully in her sleep at 73, Jonas's hand still in hers. They buried her on the hill overlooking the ranch, beneath the open sky she'd loved. Her daughter spoke at the service. So did the people she'd helped over the years, hundreds of them, representing thousands of lives she'd touched. They talked about her strength, her courage, her refusal to be broken. But Jonas said something different. Margaret was the strongest person I ever knew, he said quietly. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she was afraid and kept going anyway. He paused, looking at the grave. She taught me that love isn't something that happens to you. It's something you choose. Every day. Through the blood and the fear and the pain, his voice cracked. And I chose her every single day until the very end. Jonas lived another 5 years after that, running the ranch, watching his grandchildren grow, keeping Margaret's legacy alive. And when his time came, they buried him beside her, under that same open sky. Two people who'd been forced together by circumstance and law, who'd become partners through necessity, and who'd found love in the wreckage of survival. The frontier had demanded everything from them, and they'd given it. But they'd gotten something back too. A life, a love, a legacy, and the knowledge that sometimes the things we're forced into become the things we choose. Sometimes survival becomes something more. Sometimes we find exactly what we need in the last place we'd think to look. That was Margaret and Jonas's story. Not a fairy tale, not perfect or easy or clean, but real. And in the end, that was enough.